Welcome to the Significance of Wealth podcast, where we explore the evolving landscape of wealth management, private investments, and collecting as both a passion and investment strategy. I'm Marty Salt, and today's guest is Alex Martins, one of the most accomplished sports executives in the country. Alex joined the Orlando Magic in 1989 as the franchise's very first director of publicity and media relations before the team had ever played a game. He rose over the course of his career to become CEO, a role he held for 14 years. He currently serves as vice chair and alternate governor of the organization, and in March of this year was inducted as the 14th member of the Orlando Magic Hall of Fame. In this episode, Alex sits down with host Tom Ruggie, a fellow member of the Orlando Magic Youth Foundation Board, to talk about what it takes to build something that outlasts you. They cover the leadership lessons Alex carried across nearly 4 decades in professional sports and what he's focused on in his next chapter, from mentoring the next generation of leaders to exploring new opportunities in investing and corporate board service. Now here's your host, Tom Ruggie.
Good day, everybody, and welcome to the Significance of Wealth podcast. Today, I've got with me a good friend of mine, Alex Martins. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Great to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right, so we'll get going. So, Alex, before the Orlando Magic ever even played a single game, you joined the team. I'd love to hear a little bit about the beginning, kind of the professional beginning, and what led you initially to the Orlando Magic, and ultimately, what was it like building a franchise from the floor up?
Well, when I got started in college, I never expected to work in the sports industry to begin with. I went to Villanova and I went to the business school there and thought that I'd be working on Wall Street or maybe doing something along the lines that you do, Tom. But
You would probably be very good at it.
I don't know. I don't know about that. But anyway, got a job as a student in the athletic department, just to make a few dollars on the side as, I was getting through school. And they assigned me to the sports information and office and the basketball department. And long story short, in my junior year, the basketball team won the national championship. And as I went through that entire process, it was so exciting, of course. We were major underdogs. No one ever expected Villanova to win the national championship at that time under Rolly Massimino. And I just had the thrill of a lifetime, going through that whole experience through, the NCAA brackets. And, we started in Dayton and went to Birmingham and ultimately played the national championship Final Four at Rupp Arena. And at the end of that process, I said to myself, wow, you can really make a career doing this. And I started talking to the folks that I worked with in the athletic department there at Villanova and, determined that, I wanted to pursue a career in sports. And so immediately after graduating from Villanova, what had ended up happening was one of the people that I had worked for moved on to become the director of public relations for the Philadelphia 76ers. And he offered me an internship right out of college, and I did that for about a year. And then got my first full-time job in sports at Georgetown University, working in their sports information office, working with the basketball program. John Thompson, the legendary coach at the time, worked with him very closely with him. And only after a year of being there, Dave Koski, who I'd worked for at Villanova and then interned for at the 76ers, called me and said, hey, Pat Williams, who was our general manager at the time at 76ers when I was an intern, went down to Florida and he left the Sixers to pursue a new expansion franchise for the NBA. And he was successful. And he's starting to put his staff together. And he asked me for, a few recommendations of people to interview. And just want to make sure that you're okay with me giving him your name. And he did, I did, and we went through the interview process. And long story short, I was the first PR director of the Magic back in 1989. Joined in April, the year of that first season when we started, in November. And it all started from there. Real small staff, a lot different than we are today.
Right.
about 30 people total. And of course, the
And where are you
Magic
today?
employ over three. Yeah, the Magic employ over 300 employees today,
Wow.
and that's full time. Add another 1,800 or so part time employees,
Oof,
and that'll give you some sense of how the NBA business has changed. In the last 35 plus years.
it's crazy. What I find interesting about your path is, you mentioned that you potentially could have been in the same field as I was, and candidly, if I had had a similar path to you, I probably could have gone the same direction that you went. So I find that to be pretty ironic. Um,
Yeah,
but then you left the Magic. You left the Magic, I think, in the late '90s, and you went and worked for what, Charlotte Hornets for a bit, and Cleveland Browns, and then you came back to Orlando and worked for Tavistock. So in the years away from the team, I think you came back in '05. Is that correct?
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So in those years away, what what did you learn in between, and ultimately what brought you back to Orlando?
It was a great learning experience because, having been with only one franchise in my career, the Magic, for those 10 years, I only knew that the way that the Magic did it and the way that the Magic operated. And, first of all, I didn't have any intent on leaving the Magic, but I also wanted to learn more about the industry. And one person that I had always looked up to from afar, didn't know him at all, but was regarded as one of the best executives in all of sports during his career, and still to this day, was Carmen Policy. And Carmen was the longtime CEO of the San Francisco 49ers, won 5 Super Bowl championships, while he was the CEO there. And Carmen had left the 49ers and was now a minority owner and CEO of the Cleveland Browns as they got restarted. Of course, the Browns moved from Cleveland to Baltimore. And after a few years, the NFL granted an expansion franchise back to Cleveland. And Carmen was the first CEO and was minority partner with Al Lerner, who was the owner at the time. And so through a recruitment firm, I was asked to interview for a position, with the Browns, and knowing that Carmen was the CEO, I jumped on it, because I'd always looked up to him, and we hit it off right away. He hired me, and I learned a lot from, Carmen in the very short 2 years, that I was there with the Browns. Certainly brought a lot back to me ultimately when I came back to the Orlando Magic. But as I was going through that process, um, one thing that Carmen and some others had suggested to me at the time, if I truly wanted to rise to the level of, operating an organization, becoming a CEO in sports, a lot of people, including Carmen, suggested that I get my MBA. So after the first 2 seasons there in Cleveland, I left and came back to Central Florida and went to UCF and got my MBA. And immediately after graduating, the Charlotte Hornets called, and they were going through a process of attempting to move from Charlotte to New Orleans. And they wanted me to spearhead the campaign in New Orleans to get all the support needed and necessary in order to gain the approval of the NBA to move from Charlotte to New Orleans. And so for, the better part of a year, I was charged with, that campaign, trying to get corporate partners, trying to get season ticket deposits, trying to get, community engagement and ultimately community support. And ultimately, we were successful, and the Hornets gained the approval of the NBA to move to Charlotte, and I stayed there, and I was the CMO for the team for a couple of seasons there in New Orleans, and ultimately met Juliet, my wife, there, and we got married in New Orleans, and decided that we really didn't want to raise a family there, so we decided to come back to Central Florida. And, when we first came back, I took a role with the Tavistock Group. Of course, the folks who own Isleworth Country Club in Lake Nona and Albany. And I worked for Joe Lewis. He had his own, private equity firm, that he and his colleagues operated, and they hired me as their vice president of sports ventures. So anything to do with sports that Tavistock operated, I was spearheading. And the two main things that we were working on at that time was, some people may remember, if you're from Central Florida, you may remember the Tavistock Cup. One of these Monday, Tuesday PGA Tour events. And it pitted all of the professional golfers at Isleworth against the professional golfers at Lake Nona. And we also operated the Isleworth Collegiate Invitational, which during its time became really the best college tournament in season in the country, bringing together the top 16 to 20 college golf programs. So we operated that for a couple of years, and after doing that for that period of time, the owners of the Magic called me. They knew I was back in town. I had interacted, with them occasionally, and they were making some major change with the organization at the time, both on the business and the basketball side. And they asked me if I'd be interested in coming back to operate the business side of the house. And that's when I came back to the Magic back in '05, and have been with them since. Of course, during that period of time, going from that EVP of business role to president of business operations and COO, and then ultimately the CEO role for what was the better part of the last 15 years.
What's interesting to hear that background, knowing you and just knowing how a lot of what you talked about in the earlier days really transitioned into, many of the things that you accomplished while with the Orlando Magic. So we'll talk about that for a second, because, you know, not just with the Orlando Magic, but you've had just an unbelievable impact on the city of Orlando. I mean, you've been named as one of the 25 most powerful people in Orlando. Brag a little bit about some of the things you've accomplished. I mean, you've had the role of as the chair of One Orlando. You were one of the major architects of the NBA's Disney World bubble during COVID, and of course, you still hold the position, I believe, as chair of the UCF Board of Trustees. And I also know there's
Yeah.
there's probably much beyond that, but
Well, Tom, I would say that a lot of my career has been greatly influenced by Rich DeVos, who purchased the team only in its third year of existence back in 1991. And so for that, call it 7 years of my first time with the Magic, got, to learn a lot from Mr. DeVos. And, he had a great influence on my leadership style, and a lot of things that I carried with me through my whole career. And one of the things that he really instilled upon all of us, when he first purchased the team, and throughout his time with us before he passed away a few years ago, was that, first of all, that he felt that the DeVosses weren't necessarily owners of the Magic; they were caretakers of the Magic, and the true owners of the Magic are the fans and the community. And he, through his actions and ultimately imparting upon all of us, felt it was really, really important to be involved in the community, and to have an impact and to give back. He always said that, that the fans and the community give so much to us, that, it's our responsibility to give back in so many different ways, both philanthropically and leadership, and, our volunteerism, et cetera. And I took that very seriously, and I started to utilize that as a building block in my career. I spent a lot of time getting involved in community-based organizations, whether it was the Chamber of Commerce or the Economic Partnership, or charitable organizations like the Coalition for the Homeless, and you know volunteered for those organizations, served on their boards, and then ultimately transitioned, through my time in those organizations into chair roles with a lot of them. Um, and the other part, that Mr. DeVos really, imparted upon me, and all of us, is that relationships are really, really important, in our business, in any business. Um, and, the relationships that we build with our fan base, with our community, are incredibly important. And again, I took that to heart, really tried to enact that every day in the way that I operated, and started building strong relationships personally and for the organizations. And those relationships over time, helped us to get through major issues that were important to the organization and important to the community, like the community venues process, like, the ultimate development of the current Kia Center. um, I really enjoyed it. I'm a people person. I don't like to be alone by myself. I like to be around people all the time, but I also like to use the power of relationships to accomplish things and to set goals and ultimately, to be able to accomplish and move things forward. And I get really charged up by that. I'm motivated by that, and I enjoy being a part of that process. Um, so hopefully during the course of that process, we've been able to do some things that have been beneficial to Central Florida, to Orlando, and to the Orlando Magic organization. And I take a lot of pride in the fact that we have accomplished quite a bit during that period of time.
Yeah. As you should. I mean, again, you've not only accomplished a lot, but you've been so beneficial to so many different arenas within the greater Orlando area, and the insight that you provide is phenomenal. I couldn't agree more. I think in business that, I say that relationships is 90%. That might be exaggerating a little bit, but the power of relationships is extremely important. Again, you've done a phenomenal job there. Let's talk a little bit about the Orlando Magic. You've run an NBA franchise, and as doing so, part of your role, and this is just part of it, but you've got to manage ownership expectations. You've got to manage player relationships. You have a large staff, as you've already mentioned. You've got the community that we've already talked about, and then you have the league itself. And you know, the way I envision your role is you're overseeing all of those different areas all at once. So how did you think about stakeholder management at that level? And you may have already addressed this, but what's the leadership lesson that transferred most directly?
Well, first of all, again, it's about relationships. And I think about our league relationship, which to me has been an important cornerstone of my leadership, and making sure that we as an organization, play a leadership role and have a strong standing with our league. And fortunately for me, almost at the same time that I started with the Orlando Magic, our current commissioner, Adam Silver, was starting with the league office. And similarly, Adam worked his way up. He came from a law firm that the league worked with, and worked his way up. Was, I would characterize it as sort of an understudy to David Stern at the time, the commissioner of the NBA. And so as we started together, Adam and I developed a relationship, and over the course of years, that relationship grew, and we've been able to influence a lot of improvements and change for the league during that period of time. And it started with that relationship. And whether it's our role in really pushing for and ultimately getting approved commercialization of the patches on uniforms, or now today in recent years, the ability for us to market as teams internationally, which we never had the ability to do before the last few years. We were limited to marketing within a 75-mile radius around Central Florida. We were never able to market our team to the rest of the world. So again, I mean, those are the kind of things that we've been able to provide leadership on. You talked about trying to convince Adam to bring the bubble to um, Walt Disney World during COVID, and those type of things. Of course, we worked with the league to bring the All-Star weekend, to Central Florida twice, and we're actually in the process of working on trying to bring it again in 2030, and hopefully we'll be successful in that as well. There's a lot of leadership lessons, to answer your question, that I learned along the way, and it starts with relationships, building relationships, not just, with other stakeholders, but with your employees, ultimately developing them and helping them understand the importance of their role to the organization, and helping them grow as leaders and people has always been an important a lesson that I learned again from Mr. DeVos and Carmen Policy and others along the way. But I've tried to uh, instill upon my leadership style and ultimately, helping to develop our leaders along the way. Um, and then, letting them do their job, not micromanaging, um, holding them accountable to goals and ultimately to what we want to accomplish, as an organization. But I've been fortunate enough to work with some incredible leaders over the course of my career, and in particular at the Orlando Magic. One of the great things about the DeVos family and their support of the organization and of our team and of the community, um, all of that has been that we have an incredibly tenured staff at the Orlando Magic. I mean, we have over 20 people, I believe, that have more than 25 years of tenure. Most of the senior leaders in the organization have been with the organization 30 plus years, some since its inception. Um, and so, we've got a high level of talent. Um, and our team is regarded as one of the best in our league and in all of professional sports, as has been noted by the Sports Business Journal. The trade publication for our industry has recognized us as one of the best places to work in sports. Two of the last 2 years, and actually, in the very first year that they had the award, we were the only team of the four major professional sports leagues that had garnered that recognition. And that's, just a credit to our team and to our ownership. Great place to work, but also people who are really dedicated and smart, intelligent, innovative, and you believe in the mission of the Orlando Magic and what we do in our community.
Great feedback on that. So, kind of a high and low for the Orlando Magic. I think you would agree we went into the season with really high expectations, and a lot of injuries, I think, kept us from accomplishing what I believe the expectations were to accomplish. Yet, still made it into the playoffs, and as the 8 seed, and facing the number 1 seed in the East, the Detroit Pistons. We go up 3-1, just amazing 3 wins. I was fortunate to be at 2 of the games, and just unbelievable time. Then, of course, that fourth game, Franz gets hurt, and afterwards, we proceed to lose the next 3, knocking us out of the playoffs. So, with that backdrop, what were your thoughts on the season, and what do you envision the near term future for the Orlando Magic as a team?
Well, it was a really odd season, as you've outlined. Started with great expectations and got off to a great start as well. And then, as you mentioned, ended up with several injuries. As a matter of fact, our top three players, Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner and Jalen Suggs, only played 16 games together all season.
I didn't
You
know
know,
that.
and
That's a
I
crazy
mean,
stat.
yeah. And so, look, I mean, this is a league about talent, right? I mean, talent wins out. I mean, obviously, you need good coaching as well. But at the end of the day, the talented teams and the talented team is usually the one that wins the championship. And it's not by accident by any stretch of the imagination. Chuck Daly told me a long time ago when he was coaching the Magic, he said, the best ability is availability. And and when you don't have the talent available, it's really difficult to win. I mean, there's just so much talent in this league. I mean, more talent than ever before. And so it was a difficult mid stretch of the season. Um, we came back from the All Star break and we went on a little bit of a run. I think the expectations by most people at that point were not very high because we were playing the number 1 seed in Detroit. And like you said, got off to a great start and, went up 3-1. But again, uh, even though we started, that series fully healthy, Franz Wagner goes down, and he was a real critical element, of that series.
Sure.
Played an incredibly great defensive role on Kate Cunningham in particular, right? And so you lose a key piece like that against the number one seed, which does have all of its talent available, and unfortunately, it fell apart pretty quickly. So, it overall, you'd have to say it was a disappointing season, and unfortunately, came to the conclusion and made the decision to make a coaching change because of it. And I mean, Jamal is an incredible coach, and is going to have an incredible career. Um, and by the way, maybe an even better person, just an incredible human being. And we're fortunate enough now to have Sean Sweeney as our head coach. And Sean has a great storied career as an assistant coach, coaching with some great organizations like Milwaukee and Dallas, and most recently San Antonio. And uh, during that period of time, has coached some great superstars. You know, coached Giannis in Milwaukee, and Luca, in Dallas, and now Wemby in San Antonio. And so, he's got a great level of experience, and great drive, great energy, as Jeff Weltman says. Relentless, in his approach. Um, and by the way, credit to Jeff for the roster that he's put together too, and has made some bold moves over the course of the last couple of years, including the trade for Desmond
Yep.
Bain, which, as we all know, definitely benefited us, as an organization, as a team, brought great shooting. And Desmond is just he's a warrior. He's an incredible professional. Has been a great addition to the organization. The prospects are as good as they were, going into next season, and hopefully the health situation next season will be better and stable. And if we have that availability, I know that we'll have some great ability to win.
I agree. I mean, they were certainly an exciting team to watch, when they were clicking on all cylinders. To your point, they just weren't clicking on all cylinders very much.
Yeah.
And I also agree Desmond was not only a huge addition for his, prowess on the floor, but the mentality that he brought to the team was just a little additional edge that I feel like the team really needed. So love having him there. Um, Quick question here. Can you give me, during your career, specifically with the Magic, what's the one high and what's the one low?
Well, the highs are definitely, when you win at the highest level, right? So for me, the highs really are the two times that we were able to, and I was able to experience going to the NBA Finals. Um, I've said several times that nothing brings a community together like tragedy or a winning sports team, right?
Sure.
And those are the two times that you see a community really galvanize, and it certainly was the case when we went to the finals both those times. I can remember those weeks of the finals. It felt like everybody was going to work, but nobody was working, because everybody was wearing their Magic blue, and every company would allow you to come in your Magic gear back in, particularly in 95. Of course, we were all in office. There was no, flexible work from home
Right.
and any of that, right? Everybody was in the office, and there wasn't casual dress code during that time. But when the Magic went to the finals, it seemed like every business in Orlando allowed their employees to wear Magic gear in support of the team during that week, and it was incredible. And those games in the old Orlando arena, and then ultimately what was then the Amway Center, were some of the most exciting games I can remember of my career. With the enthusiasm of the crowd, and you know, couldn't hear yourself think, because it was so loud in the building. So those were definitely the highs. The lows, I would have to say the most difficult thing to do in this business, in any business, And, certainly the most difficult of my career is whenever you have to make the decision to make a change, when it involves a human being, and somebody that's worked for you for so long and, put their heart and soul and effort, into the organization. And whether it was a general manager or a coach that I had to dismiss or even, a frontline employee. Those are the difficult times. Those are the really difficult times because, back to my earlier point, you build relationships with people, you help develop people, you put your heart and soul into people. And, the business just dictates at certain points in time that you have to make a change, with individuals. And so those were always the difficult times, during my career.
That that makes sense. Last question about the Magic. I wanted to know if you could share, the funniest player interaction that you've ever had.
Well,
I'm sure there's.
there are a lot of
I'm
them.
sure there's a lot.
There's a lot of them, some of which cannot be repeated.
Right.
But one that can, of course, I think everybody knows, even to this day, that um, Shaquille O'Neal is just an incredible practical joker. You know, he loves it. He loves playing practical jokes on people. And so I was the PR director, during the Shaq era. And, I've always said that, traveling with Shaq and Penny and that group um, must have been like traveling with the Beatles because everywhere we went, there were just thousands of people. And when we would travel, we would get into cities at 2 and 3 in the morning, on back to backs, leave a city after we play a game, go to the next city. And there'd be hundreds of people waiting at the hotel, just waiting to see Shaq or to get an autograph and Penny, etc. Um, so, two quick stories about Shaq. On that note, in traveling with him and when the fans were waiting for us at hotels when we would arrive, we went into Sacramento early in the morning. It was 2 o'clock in the morning or something. One trip, and Shaq says to me, "Watch, I'm going to walk in and they're not even going to recognize me." I'm like, "What are you kidding me? How can they not recognize you? You're one of the biggest humans in the world. They're going to recognize you." Well, long story short, he has this whole getup. He's got a wig and glasses and a hat and this trench coat um, and sure enough, he gets off the bus and walks right past everybody. And I'm the last one off the bus, and everybody's like, "Where's Shaq? Where's Shaq?" And I said, "Well, you missed him. He walked in already." And that was like what he loved to do. He loved to be a practical joker. Well, for me personally, the one thing he did to me as part of, my role as the PR director, obviously, one of my responsibilities is to make sure that Shaq and all the players interact with the media and, you know, fulfill all the interview requests, etc. And, this is in his second, third year. And, he's just tired of doing all the interviews in the middle of the season. We're going through the grind. At that time we were on national TV every Sunday on NBC, and so he was always having to do the pregame interviews and the halftime interviews and postgame. So anyway, we're finishing up practice, and I go out to the middle of the court to get Shaq to do his interviews, and he's like, I'm not doing it today." And I was trying to convince him that he had to do them, that it was his responsibility, the media was waiting for him, etc. Well, he proceeds to wrap me up in medical tape at mid-court and leave me I couldn't move. My entire body, wrapped me up in medical tape, um, and left me there, at mid-court. But that was Shaq. He was always a practical joker, and um, there were a lot
To
of
this day,
stories like that
everybody
along the
loves
way.
Shaq. I mean, he's just has sounds funny to say this, but he kind of has like just a glowing personality.
Without a doubt, and look, it's transitioned to a great career after his career, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to this day, he's got to be the highest level endorser of, many, many products for a former professional athlete, right?
Sure. All right, we're gonna close up, Alex, with just a couple personal questions. So, Um, Give us a glimpse of what you like to do in your personal time. You mentioned the wine. You can That's something else we have in common. I sometimes tell people I'm a collector, but I actually consider myself more of a drinker than a collector because I don't. Uh, but have a nice collection, but really enjoy drinking it. But what else do you do?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, just love spending time with my family. I have an incredible family, two young girls who are both at the University of Southern California and doing great. Have grown up to be two great young women, and of course, my wife Juliet. So, love spending time with them. Love spending a lot of time together. We do a lot of family time together. But beyond that, you've mentioned I'm a collector of wine as well. Probably more of a consumer than a collector like yourself, but enjoy collecting and enjoy the history of wine and visiting great wine regions of the world, etc. So that that's definitely one of my passions. But one passion that has really come about over the course of the last 10 or 15 years that um, maybe one of my favorite, if not my favorite thing to do is fly fishing. Um, so we started coming out to Colorado in the summertime in particular um, about 15, 17 years ago. And the first couple of times that I came here, saw people fly fishing, and I thought that it looked incredibly relaxing and just felt like it was something that I wanted to do. And I'm not an outdoorsman, I don't deep sea fish either or any of that. It just looked incredibly relaxing to me and technical. And so anyway, ended up going, back home to Orlando from a trip, to Colorado and found one of the world's, I guess, best fly fishing casting teachers that was actually on the east side of town and scheduled a couple of lessons and, started to
In
get into
Orlando.
it and in Orlando.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the world's best, casting teachers. And we just did it in his backyard. We didn't do it on water, but just teaching the technical aspects of how to cast in fly fishing because it's much different than deep sea fishing, etc. So anyway, the next few times I came out here, started to do it, and long story short, I now belong to a club in Colorado that is both as much a fly fishing club as a golf club. So I just love it. It's exhilarating. It's the most relaxing thing, that I do. When I get out there on the water, I just forget about everything.
That's awesome. Well, I also know you're an avid golfer, but I kind of get the feeling that that doesn't necessarily relax you as much.
No, it doesn't relax me as much, and I think I'm a better fly fisherman than I am a golfer.
Fair enough. All right. So, you were inducted into the Orlando Magic Hall of Fame. Um, During that induction, you said you wanted to be remembered as a leader, and that as you look towards the next chapter of your life, you have a desire to help leaders grow for the future. In practicality, what does that look like to you at this point?
Well, in practicality, it's already begun in the form of, mentoring young leaders in the Magic organization. That's part of my new role.
Mhm.
And, I've spent a lot of time with everything from young salespeople that, may be fairly new to the organization or salespeople that, have been with the organization for a while, but, want to take that next step in their career to some of our most senior executives. Just helping them, get through the challenges of a career, helping them, take on the principles necessary to take that next step in their career, and just giving them advice based on my career and what I've experienced and what I've seen, not just in our organization, but other organizations, and interacting in the community like we've talked about, or, within our league, et cetera. So that mentorship is something that, I take very seriously and I want to continue to do. But, I also want to continue to help others in their leadership style. I've always been, a great student of leadership and an avid reader when it comes to, leadership books, etc. And ultimately, I think I'd like to write my own book on leadership. The principles from sports in particular that have guided me, and leadership principles from the sports industry that people can utilize in any leadership position, in any industry, etc. So that's one thing I want to do. I've gotten, and you've helped me along the way with a lot of this, and trying to take it to the next level, getting into just investing, and understanding other businesses, um, and joining groups of people and organizations that are in the investment world, and doing some of that. And then finally, I'd like to utilize my leadership skills to hopefully, serve on some corporate boards. I think my leadership experience and then the experience that I've been able to have as being on several community boards. And you mentioned we didn't talk much about the UCF board, but I've been the chairman of the board at UCF for the last 5 years, and that's been an incredible experience working very closely with the state and other business leaders to help push that university forward. And we gained an incredible accolade in the last few months of having reached preeminence, which is one of the highest levels of recognition and achievement that a university can achieve in the state of Florida. So taking all of that experience and bringing it to corporate boards is something that I'd like to do, in this next chapter as well.
Sounds like you've got a great path ahead of you. I actually, I think you would do an amazing job writing a book. So I think that's a pretty cool goal for you. All right, let's close it out with
Great.
the last
Thanks.
question. We call our podcast The Significance of Wealth. And, you've worked incredibly hard during your 40-year career, and you've built wealth for you and your family. But what can you tell us about that process that to you, what you've done over the last 40 years makes life significant?
Well, I mean, the significance of wealth is at the end of the day, trying to achieve the hopes and dreams of your family, I think, right? And so all through that period of time here, the majority of the time here, with your assistance, we've been able to focus on um, creating wealth and the vehicles and the savings and ultimately the strategy behind ensuring that we as a family can reach our goals, both personally and professionally. And it started with very early on, preparing for the girls' um, education and preparing that part of wealth to allow them to go to the, whatever university of their choosing. And of course, thank goodness that you had me on the right path because, of course, they chose one of the most expensive universities in the country to go to, both of them.
Both.
But no, both of them.
Yeah.
No, but in all seriousness, it's a great university. And it's perfect for them because both of them, in some ways, want to work in the entertainment industry in different ways, and no better place, I think, than USC to prepare them for that. But, that was planning and that was strategy, that you and I worked on together, that allowed us to be able to provide that for them. And then similarly, having a strategy of investment, along the way so that you can reach those goals. Whether it's, our ability to have a home in Colorado and spend some time actually here. We're here at the moment. In the summertime in particular, or to travel the world like we've been able to do and want to continue to do, and also to leave a legacy for the girls, in some ways. Um, by the way, it's been incredibly fun and interesting to me to work on that significance of wealth and building that wealth, and the lessons learned through the private and alternative investments that you've given us access to, and now, opened our eyes to it to the point where, I'm doing it in other places as well. Um, and so, the significance of wealth is ultimately, being able to accomplish what your dreams and goals are, for you and your family, and to live a happy and healthy and ultimately fruitful life. And I'm really grateful that you've been a great partner in us being able to do that.
Thank you so much for the compliments, but an amazing answer to close this out. So, Alex, just want to say very much appreciate you as a friend and a longtime client, but certainly appreciate you taking the time to provide us with your wisdom on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Happy to do it, and thanks for having me, Tom. It was really enjoyable. Thanks.
Awesome. My pleasure.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to Significance of Wealth on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also follow Tom Ruggie and Destiny Family Office on LinkedIn and destinyfamilyoffice.com for more insights on wealth management, private market opportunities, and collectibles. Until next time. The expressed views, thoughts, and opinions belong solely to the host and/or guests and are not investment recommendations or opinions issued by Destiny Family Office or its affiliates. Investment advisory services are offered through Destiny Family Office, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Destiny Family Office podcasts are the sole property of Destiny Family Office, and information provided is for informational and educational purposes only. Learn more at destinyfamilyoffice.com/disclosures.